Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Today, a wonderful example of what science fiction can do when it is thoughtful, thought through, intelligent, well written, and with a purpose as well. Today we want to quickly talk about Chris Beckett, an English writer, and his novel from 2017, America City. Now, Chris Beckett has quite a reputation in science fiction. As one of those writers hovering on the line, I guess, between science fiction and mainstream fiction. And certainly his work lately has morphed into a more fantastic, perhaps, or with fantastic accents than science fiction. Certainly his name is probably most famous for his trilogy, Eden trilogy, and the first of which was 2012 Dark Eden. Very, very interesting trilogy indeed, with a wonderful premise, world building of absolutely top class. But Chris Beckett, to my mind, is even more interesting when he writes novels like America City, we'll discuss in a minute. His Two Tribes in 2020 is not science fiction really. It is much more an exploration of the sociology, as it were, of our world in many ways, and this opposition that exists between two sort of categories. And it's a very confrontational book and very interesting book to read. And Tomorrow, a novel from 2021, this time more perhaps asking questions about narration, life in general, art, creation, an extremely, extremely good book. Now, all this being said, today America City from 2017. Now, one could say that this work from 8 years ago could have been written today, certainly having observed what has been going on in the world in 2025 so far. What is the premise of this wonderful novel? Well, the premise is a topic that is coming to the fore more and more in science fiction. Of course, since G.J. Ballard in the 50s and 60s, it already existed, but it's certainly now acquiring even more importance, and that is climate change. Now, Chris Beckett projects us in a very near future. There's no set date, I think, but it's very obviously our world in only a couple of years, a couple of decades at the most. And what has been happening is the world heating up, as it is, of course, doing right now. But it's been heating up to such an extent that the southern part of the continent of North America has become simply uninhabitable. Nobody can live there anymore. It's simply too hot. So what is going on here is quite simply that you will have, of course, an immigration or emigration from the southern parts of the continent up north to try and find some relief, to try and find some place to live and grow things and eat. Well, okay, this is not so far extremely novel, nor is it interesting as such. What makes it very interesting is that, of course, what is happening in, for example, Mexico, which has become inhospitable to a degree that nobody lives there anymore, all those people have moved up. They moved up, of course, in the only place north, and that is America. But the south of America itself is becoming, of course, impossible to live in. Texas and California and Florida, all the southern part of America is subjected to the same climate change and, of course, immense heat. Now, what started out, therefore, as a novel about potentially immigrants coming into America. A wonderful example simply certainly comes to mind, and is of course T.C. Boyle, Tortilla Curtain, I think it is. Turns out to be no, it's not a novel about emigration to America as such. It is now turning into emigration from one part of America to the next. Now you will say, yeah, okay, fine, what does that mean? Well, immediately, of course, that allows Chris Beckett to introduce the idea of, well, how do we look at migrants? It's easy enough, unfortunately, throughout history, it's easy enough to see that typically a response to migration, to migrants coming into one's country is a negative one. They're coming, they're invading, they're taking our jobs, whatever. But here, of course, the question is, how does one react when one lives, I don't know, in the north of America, above the Midwest part? How do those people react when the migrants turning up on their doorstep are people from Texas or, I don't know, Georgia, Louisiana? Now, of course, this becomes therefore very, very interesting indeed. And the novel is told from various perspectives, different characters. And I have to say here again that we have to give full plaudits to Chris Beckett for being mindful of giving us a wide array of reactions to what is going on. And of course, it would have been easy to narrate the novel from the perspective of a, I don't know, a very lefty a migrant encouraging, supporting person, or of course it would have been equally easy to write it from the opposite side. But here, Chris Beckett gives us different characters. Some of them are not necessarily palatable, depending on, well, they won't be palatable to everybody, obviously, because they articulate sometimes very obvious takes or very radical takes on the subject of migration, internal migration as well, of course, and reactions to climate change. And that what makes this book, of course, not only a very, very entertaining novel in itself and very well told, it also turns it into an encouragement to reflect on those questions and to consider the multiple perspectives that play in such a debate, and a crucial debate, of course, and a very contemporary debate. Now, we could say, well, great, another novel that sorts of talks about things and then you close it and you forget it. No, Chris Beckett is much, much better than this. There is a further twist. Because, of course, once people from the south of the United States start moving up, well, space becomes rare. That is, there are simply too many people now occupying a much, much smaller space. So what do those people do? They think of, well, emigrating themselves, right? You may be migrating from Louisiana up to, I don't know, Montana, and then think about going up and up and up. Or you might be somebody already from the north of the United States, thinking there are too many people coming my way, I need to move. Or it could be any of those reasons. Again, the reasons for migrating are numerous, of course. So now the novel takes on a further twist, because the only way Americans can migrate to escape the heat or to escape the migration or whichever reason they have is to, of course, go north. And north is Canada. Now, Canada has been in the news in relation to America in 2025, certainly. And so it's a prescient move from Chris Beckett here to involve American migration to Canada. And basically what happens? Well, what happens in this third, as it were, part of the novel is now that Americans arrive en masse in Canada. And of course, Chris Beckett here starts thinking about migration a further step again, because Canadians are originally certainly very welcoming and very generous, and they understand. Now, the arguments used by some Americans is, of course, well, Canada is a huge place. There are very few people in it. Let us get there and just, found cities and establish ourselves and start again. Well, fair enough, of course, but whatever happens, it means that an enormous wave of migrants with a very similar yet distinct culture and habits and ways and expectations, perhaps, are certainly in your country. And what do you do with that? Now, of course, you can scale this up and down. We have, of course, a migrant situation in Europe. And as you may know, Europe is trying to deal with this in whichever way you think is appropriate or not. And certainly different countries have different responses to migration. Equally, different people have different responses to migration. It also depends on the way you look at the reasons for migrating. So, of course, this whole question is central in Chris Beckett's America City, but it is not the only thing, of course, because it touches on so many social and humane, really, issues as well. So, in terms of sacrifice, what do you sacrifice of what you have for others? To what degree are you prepared to do so? And crucially, of course, for whom? And that touches on the limits of empathy, obviously, and the degree to which you are willing to help somebody. That is opposed very much, or opposed, at least morally speaking, perhaps, to the perhaps land grabbing attitude that some migrants exhibit in a novel. For example, when the Americans move up north, they have a tendency to not only have a territory, but take it for themselves and want more of it. So they want more, of course. And there is the very interesting question, ultimately, of when those migrants, either from Louisiana up to America, in the north of America, or the American up to Canada, the question is also of you know, being grateful. Should one be grateful? Should a migrant be grateful that somebody else is helping him or her? To what degree should they be grateful? And how long should this gratitude last? And it is a very sensitive question, this, of course, and a real crucial question in a world today as well. Because it plays on what those welcome migrants expect or think they should have, which is again very different depending on who it is, and of course the migrants themselves, who have typically no wish to migrate. They're only leaving the country because they must, because they have no choice, and therefore it's not going abroad to get something, to grab something. It is going abroad because one has no choice and one wants to live. This, of course, is very often lost in the equation, and it is firmly at the center, again, of America City, this wonderful novel by Chris Beckett. So we have here a perfect example of what science fiction can do. Good science fiction does, top of the range science fiction does, and that is, of course, to examine the world of today through a slightly distorted lens. It's a very famous theory in science fiction theory, I guess. This cognitive disjunction, it is called, where you basically take a situation that looks almost exactly like what you know is real, but on some points is not quite the same. And it is in that difference, that disjunction between the reality and the alternative, that you find material to think about the world you inhabit, which of course very often you take for granted. And science fiction is one of the tools that enable us to cut through this veil of reality and to try and examine what is behind, of course. Chris Beckett is a wonderful author. This is a perfect way to start with him and his work, I think, and I can only recommend that you read that one, and hopefully you will fall in love with his work and read many more of his books. Don't forget also that if you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, comment, of course. Let me know which Chris Beckett you may have read, what you thought of that novel. And in the meantime, thank you very much. Bye-bye.